Welcome to the Trevor Roberts Talk Fest. We are live. Thank you, Maxwell, for joining again. We've been talking about possibly doing this a little bit more regularly. I think that's a good idea. So that could be a thing in the future. But in the last week or so, we've had some crazy things happen in the political climate, and you are the perfect person to come on and talk about some of this stuff. So I've got a few things I want to talk about with you, but I think I'll just turn it over to you and let you start wherever you want to start, and we'll just see where this goes. I figured you'd want to start with something with Biden, but anything coming to mind that you want to start with?
Oh man, dude. It's like I was telling you beforehand, like we were sitting there thinking, or I was trying to place when you and I spoke about, doing the podcast again. And based on what I told you, I actually think it was like the day after. It might have been the day of the shooting, the assassination attempt, or whatever we're calling it at this point. I don't know. I remember just reflecting yesterday, thinking about, what would be a good way to kind of progress through why some of the things I think matter. And it occurred to me that I was like, man, I think I might have proposed this, and then like all this crazy stuff happened. So I don't know. I think we're about 100 days out from election day. I don't do math and I don't do calendars, which explains why I'm always late. But I'm pretty sure that math is right, um, and that tends to be a pretty big chunk of campaigning. But yeah, uh, I don't know. I was thinking we should talk about polling because I'm on part of a couple different subreddits that I think are a little more, how do I put this, political from a technical sense, or maybe an analytical sense. And I think we've talked about this a few times. I don't know if we've ever talked about it on here, but my bachelor's is in political science, and there's people hear political science, and I believe that they think about um, government, almost like public administration, as like a field of
Yeah,
study.
that's what I
Which,
think.
yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, that's like when I think of business, I think of people working in a business. But there's politics is a really fascinating thing, but political science is really, I think, from a theoretical foundation, a question of democratic government, if you will, and how we think it should work, how we think the best way to achieve what we think is worth achieving. So, in a sense, there's a lot of what I studied was based more around like, what does representative government actually look like? What's the best way to get the person that best represents what we want? And I think we have discussed at least somewhat about, inherent problems with political parties and two party systems, in that the primary system kind of pushes things to the extreme, and then you end up without a moderate option. And so that's what I mean by analytical politics, or I don't know, maybe that's theoretical politics. But what I that's a long-winded way of me saying I'm paying a lot of attention to polling, primarily through one or two subreddits that are, maybe the best way to say this is, it's like statistics and politics kind of meet. In particular, there's one called 538, which 538 is, God, why can I not think of his name? I have his book right there. It's Nate Silver's company. I don't think it's actually his company anymore, but they hit it big. I want to say Obama's first or second term election by predicting so many things correctly. And although things have changed a little bit, I think he was bought by CNN or something, and then he ended up kind of taking his statistical model and leaving or something along those lines. All of this to say that they have a really fascinating discourse on there about, what do these polls mean? And I've been watching it just go all over the place, right? And there's a lot of different polling sources, but um, you get the sense that and I've personally had the sense in the last 4 years that polls are less reliable than they ever used to be, and they were never. I don't know. I mean, with relative accuracy, I think we have an idea of the obvious states, but then you have certain states that it's just like I think that they're missing the mark a lot. And the Trump election win in 2016 is a great example of like, Nate Silver's company was one of the only ones that I think gave him. I think he was predicting like 70% chance of a Hillary victory. So out of 100 times, she went 70. But everybody else was overwhelming, and they were obviously. I think that they were wrong. So there's something happening with polling, and I've just been paying a ton of attention to that, and it's been fascinating. So I kind of added that to our list of things. But yeah, I think we should go chronologically.
So, okay, polling. This is a dumb question, but polling is like a prediction. It's like they take some type of survey. I don't know if it's some organization that's supposed to be non-biased does a survey, and it's supposed to predict what the vote is going to be. And you're saying we just can't rely on those anymore.
So it's fascinating because the undertone of your question, which I think is fair, and most topics that touch politics as a topic. Politics is probably a subtopic of everything, but it takes the opposite hierarchy and how we think of it as Americans, especially lately. Pollsters, I think, really have an incentive to be correct because, like, I'm telling you all the stuff about Nate Silver in 538. Uh, as far as I understand his political leanings, I probably don't agree with them, although it's hard to know. He's not broadcasting them as much. I really don't think there's a narrative drive to predict the result that you want if you don't think it's going to happen, if your job is to predict results. So you've got a variety of these institutions that do this. Some of them are news sources, some of them are like purely uh, statistical, I don't know, canvassers. Like I want to say like Harris Poll, I think actually might be a newspaper, but like Pew Research, for example, does demographic research and opinion research, and they tend to be pretty neutral in their findings. Like, and I don't mean, shouldn't say neutral. They tend to be pretty just blunt. Like all of this to say, I don't think that there's a political lean to the enactment or execution of polling. But you asked your real question, right? Was what is polling? And I think this kind of goes to the heart of the problem because polling is trying to gather. If the election happened today, how would all of these people vote? And now they're going to structure it a little differently. They will ask questions like,
How do they do
are
that?
you going to? Well,
Is it a
this is the
survey or?
problem, right? Like, do you remember growing up? I do. We had a home phone. Like, you could call a number and it would call our house. Obviously, we're saying this for all the chillins out there. I don't have one. I don't know if you do. I don't think
No,
I
I
ever
don't.
will.
No.
Right? What would be the point? It's easier for me to get a second phone line on my cell phone than to get a home phone line and worry about it ringing and come home and play your voicemails. Ah, ridiculous. So they used to be able to call households, and that's pretty much gone. So they're kind of playing catch up with like almost like a psychological understanding of how people act within. So you have your population, right? And they want a representative sample. So you've got to go and find, in theory, you want to get a pool of, let's say, you've got 45% women and 55% men in your state, and 20% are black. But I mean, every demographic just adds a piece to the pie, right? But the theory is that you can get a representative sample with a thousand people. The problem is not usually the size of the sample; it's usually whether the sample is representative or not. And so then they have to also kind of control for predictions, or I guess predictions based off of past behavior, to determine, which people are more likely to, like women are more likely to answer the phone, for example. So you're going to call, in theory, less women, because you got to get to your number that represents your sample for the state. Let's just use the state framework for now. And I find that there are problems because actually this came up the other day when I told Caitlin something like, yeah, I usually do if someone's canvassing, like I will answer their questions. She's like, oh my God, why? And I'm like, because I care about that process. I think it's valuable for us to be able to know. Although it's usually like 5 minutes. There was one the other day about the city council in Austin, and and I was on the phone with this lady for like 20 minutes, and she just kept. It's because like she wanted to give. It was poorly designed questionnaire, right? Um, some of it could be over the internet, but you want to guarantee that the person is from this area. Some of it could, in theory, the best representations are people who are going to take it seriously because you're paying them, and those do exist as well. But they will go and this stuff's not free, so they'll go and try and run this model through enough people to where they have a representative sample, and then they will try and say this is what we're predicting in this state, right? And I think that there's inherent problems with which demographics are more likely to um, do this, right? Answer the phone, if you will. Um, which, I mean, it makes sense that you're undecided, your moderate middle would be the most, they're probably the least interested in giving you their feelings, especially with how polarizing things have become. Um, I think that there's a strong sense of pride and like a counterculture that is occurring. Well, in general, I think it's occurring more in the last 10 years, but those people are disproportionately likely to want to tell you how they feel, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, so you've just got a bunch of controls that I think are shifting really quickly, and it's become, in my opinion, harder and harder to get accurate representations.
What has got you thinking about polling? I mean, is it because with Biden dropping out, you're trying to get a sense of like what does the race look like now, or why is polling on your mind?
I mean, it's on my mind because it's on my feed, and it's because it's everyone wants to know like what are the odds for X, Y, and Z right now. It's been something I've tried to pay more attention to since Trump's win in 2016 because everyone said he didn't have a chance to win, and it's reinforced some of the political realities that are you have your beliefs, I have my beliefs, my parents have their beliefs, everyone I grew up with has their beliefs, and like 5 states decide who's president. There may be more people in California than those 5 states combined, but those 5 states elections decide. So polling data from Arizona, Nevada, pretty much the Rust Belt, but it feels like it's just Pennsylvania now. Oh, Michigan's got a
What are the
trifecta of.
five? Are these the 5 states? You're naming them off?
Oh yeah. It's literally like Arizona, Nevada, um, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. That's 6, I believe.
Yeah.
There are states that, and Georgia feels like Georgia and North Carolina are kind of always there, but they feel like they're part of the Deep South, and so they're not. But Georgia obviously just went blue last year, and I think that there's a theory that North Carolina's in play. I don't know how much I believe it. Barack Obama won North Carolina. I can't remember if it was one or both terms. North Carolina's got a fairly healthy influx of young, educated people who tend to vote blue, and to Charlotte in particular. I think there's a couple other cities in the like Research Triangle that have a big draw. Texas has shifted considerably more blue over the last. Well, I feel like it's like all but one election
Well,
in the last
if
5 have gotten closer and closer and closer, and we have pretty unpopular Republican candidates here. So you'd think, like I would tell you, I think Texas is probably closer than Florida, which has historically been kind of a flip. But
I mean, if Texas went blue, isn't that kind of it? Because Texas
Yeah,
is
that
like
would.
the biggest.
Well, I mean, no. It would be weird if for Texas to go blue and like Arizona not to.
Well, but in my mind, it's I could be wrong, but I think Texas has the second most
It does, yeah.
votes.
I think
So
it's
that's
20,
like,
29, 29
I mean,
electoral votes.
that's like the biggest swing possible for the red states to lose the most. Blue gains the most it can gain.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
once
obviously you've got it's like California, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, I believe. No, Florida, Pennsylvania. Maybe. Yeah, Florida's fourth, Pennsylvania's fifth. Pennsylvania makes sense that it's populated, but I don't think people think of it as a. It's because these Midwestern Rust Belt states have very populated cities in them, but they are rural and historically more blue collar. It makes sense that there's a demographic split there. What is fascinating is, there's a trend over time towards concentration in cities. And I think people forget that Philadelphia is that populated. And then you got Pittsburgh, and there's
Pittsburgh,
probably
yeah.
another. Yeah. So, like, if they've got an NFL team, a bunch of people live there, except Green Bay. Like, whatever with those guys. So, Texas is trending the same way. It's just a question of there are mechanical uh, disenfranchisement issues that I think occur here maybe more than other places, but I haven't personally had trouble voting, so I'm trying to think about it. I think there's, and this goes to kind of the second point, which is true for both polling and kind of just elections in general, is that if there's a premise that is believed by everyone that like this will not go this way, it does not matter, then people who are underdogs, so to speak, are less likely to vote. So it tends to come down to those 5 or 6 states for a couple of reasons, but it's also worth noting that because they're historically swing states, they they tend to get a lot of turnout. So you've
It
got
makes sense, yeah, because you feel like your vote
Pennsylvania's,
matters.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If you think that everybody in Texas hates Ted Cruz and they're not voting because that's not true, you're wrong. They're not voting because they're like, well, it's never going to change. He's like the least popular senator in the last 20 years, and just keeps winning. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know though. And this goes to another thing, is this like narrative events that take place that are outside of directly affecting presidents. Like I think that those things start to play a bigger and bigger part. Like Texas has a pretty rough history in the last couple of years with energy infrastructure, which is
right.
indirectly the result of actions taken by our governor prior to him being governor when he was working for ERCOT, which is I don't know what it is. It's like the utility infrastructure management company. Let's call it that. That's probably not the right term.
Well,
And then Ted Cruz runs off to Mexico, and we've got power outages, and all
it's
that stuff has
terrible.
happened twice in the last like 3 months.
Yeah,
Like there's been people in Houston without electricity for a week. It's probably been two, but I am assuming that most of them have power again now. I don't know, but those things resonate with people when they're formerly not motivated. Now I'm going to show up because I hate
yeah.
you, Ted
Well,
Cruz, and
2 years ago,
right.
I was covering two different people. One lived in Dallas, one lived in Houston, and we spoke every day. We had a relationship where we were internal, external counterparts. And
That's such a weird way to describe.
oh, well, I'm trying.
And-
I'm trying to be very vague about it because I don't like talking
Mm,
about my work. But um, but anyway, I have to speak to them every day as part of my job. And so all of a sudden there was that snowstorm and Texas lost power for like a week, and it was like all of Texas. And so even though one's in McKinney and one's in the Woodlands, very far
yeah,
apart, both of them lost their power for a week. And the one in the Woodlands like went to a neighbor that had a generator, so he ended up being okay. And he had 4 kids.
yeah,
They ended up. It was awkward, he said, but he was okay. The one in McKinney had nothing, and they said they lived at like the bottom of a hill. They couldn't get their cars up the hill because it was like the roads were iced over,
Yeah.
and their house was like 30 degrees. They were like getting water out of something and like
You're like
dumping it to get their
boil. You
toilet to
hope you've
flush.
got your stove works so you can like boil snow, right?
Yeah.
It's wild.
And I think their pipes burst. But I mean, they literally had like, I would talk to her every day and she'd have like four coats on and thought they were going to freeze to death in Texas. So that was just wild.
Yeah, yeah. It's obviously events like that stick with people. Like you
Yeah.
remember that. It's happened several times now. Those are extreme failures, but every summer and every winter, there is notices sent out from the utility providers, be it in Houston or in Austin. Hey, everyone, don't run your AC as hard because the grid can't take it. Or hey, everyone, and it's funny. It is funny because that's like okay, that's ridiculous. Like and it's because okay, so let's take a step back, and I guess we can pivot to some of the legal questions with this too. Um, you're subject. Well, Congress has the authority to pass laws that regulate interstate commerce. So money changing, money crossing state lines is subject to the federal government. And I mean, to be completely honest, that clause of the Constitution, the Commerce Clause, probably is responsible for the overwhelming majority of the federal government today because our economy today is fundamentally it's not localized like it once was. So I don't know if you know this. There's really only like two power grids in the United States, and they all cross state lines, except Texas didn't want to be regulated from the federal government, so we disconnected ourselves from the surrounding states' power grids. So when there's a surge and we need more, we can't get it. Um, and that also means we don't have to submit or comply with federal regulation on energy grids. So in the same vein, we also have an outdated energy grid. So it's a pretty fascinating problem that's uniquely caused by the people who don't have to deal with its consequences. And I think people remember those things.
What's the
There's
benefit? Like, why did Texas want to do this?
the benefit is um, okay. It's like let's put it this way. The benefit is you can't tell us what to do. The benefit is
I will say that's a big one for me. I don't like people
yeah.
telling me what to do. So I kind
Well,
of,
when I say you don't have to do what they tell you to do, I mean the people I pay uh, money every month to be able to use electricity. Those people don't have to do what officials I elect tell them to do.
oh yeah,
Um,
that's, well, I
but
guess I
but it's pretty
resonate with the
wild.
attitude, but that sucks for the people of
Well,
Texas.
yeah, I mean, there's a reason that utilities are very regulated
Well,
because
they're
in theory you
monopolies, right? That's good, I would say.
I don't know that they're necessarily regulated because they're monopolies, but you in theory you'd break up a monopoly. They're regulated because they're necessities. So like
Yeah.
you can only charge so much for these things, for example. It really goes to a point, a broader question that I think is emerging lately, which is why are why are your options for cell phone providers all just equally garbage with no real reason to incentivize and improve the quality of service? Uh, it's because they're not treated like a utility, but they should be, I would argue. Um, anyways, I guess to take a step back from all of that, they can have a shitty power grid and demand payment because I have no other choice. But because they're not connected to power grids in other states, the federal government can't tell them what to do. So you have cronyism and all sorts of people in positions where they're insulated from reproach and they're never going to be replaced, basically deciding on whether or not they should get a bonus or if they should spend money on making their product better. And it's not like they're going to lose customers. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to buy it from? You know? So that is a short summary of why I think things may be that might play a part in changing feelings about the party that has historically been in power in Texas. But I I won't quite believe it until I see it. So we'll see. I guess to pivot back, yeah, let's
Okay.
just run through the last month of politics in America.
All right. Well, I want to start with Biden dropping out. I'm interested to talk a little bit about the Trump shooting. I don't know if you have any thoughts around it, but um, with Biden dropping out, I'm curious. I know. Okay, so I said to you a while back that I don't know anything about politics, and I think you said politics affects everyone's everyday life. You know, I don't know, but one thing I know
That
is
sounds
true.
like something I would say.
Yeah, I disagree with that, but I think you probably have good points. But I guess I will say something that's sort of embarrassing, but does help, but does is very true. It's a little embarrassing again, but Kamala Harris, is that her? Yeah.
Yeah, that's her
I-
name.
Okay, so my brother or my brother's wife, I think, sent a text to my family chat and said like, I guess Kamala Harris is up next or something like that, and I didn't know what she was talking about, and so I googled Kamala Harris and found out that was the vice president, and I had
Yeah.
never heard her name. Like I did not know that was the vice president, and I didn't
Oh,
know, like I've never heard of her.
you had no idea who the vice president was.
No, because I'm not
Well,
interested in
it's
politics.
good, dude. If you knew all this stuff, I'd have no reason to come on here. So I'm not mad about it. Kamala Harris
Well,
was a
I am interested, but
she's
I
like a
just want
go
to
ahead.
ask: is
Yeah.
she the front runner or
It's really hard to answer that. She's probably got it, but I'll explain. So Kamala Harris is a she was a senator. I can't remember how many terms she was a senator for. It might just be like two or three. Can't remember. In California, she's from California. She was a career prosecutor prior to that, and then attorney general.
so?
In
She was
fact,
the California senator, like when Biden chose
yeah,
her to be vice president.
I can't remember if she was actively a senator at the time. She had run for president in the Democratic primary at
I
least
gotcha.
once, if not twice. I can't remember if she ran in 2016. She didn't get it if she did. She definitely ran in 2020 and was like the first one to drop out. She's, I mean, okay, so I've seen a couple of her little, what do they call it? Bully pulpit. I can't remember what that goes back to. It might be Teddy Roosevelt. Is basically like speaking from the president's office, but you're kind of campaigning. So she's had a few speeches. She seems a little more dialed in on her stage presence, but she was historically, I felt pretty uncharismatic. Um, just kind of okay. Let's talk about one of the elephants in the room. So, like women in politics, I think have to walk a finer line than male candidates because they don't want to come across too angry for fear of, and this is sort of just a trope, I guess, in general with business. Maybe you don't want to seem bitchy, but they you also can't seem weak. So it's a tougher thing. Um, Elizabeth Warren, I think, is a good example. Who most of her messaging has been on brand with like financial regulation because that's what her career was sort of built around. Kamala Harris, trickier um, because she has a tough on crime background. Well, that's probably one of the things that I found problematic is probably spearheaded or is at least responsible for some of the war on drugs collateral damage in California over the years. But for most intents and purposes, her platform is like very, very, very liberal. Okay, so then you're in this primary, and those two things don't mix very well together because people who are also very, very liberal are going to see this blemish of like, yeah, well, you locked up a bunch of people for smoking weed in California. And I think that she's always tried to have a very neutral political disposition, and it's really not super workable today. So didn't have a great primary in 20 2020, 2019, whenever the primaries were. But and I'm not 100% sure on the reasoning behind this. Biden picked her as his vice president. Um, he had come on record and said that he was going to pick a woman, and there weren't very many. There was probably like 5 in the primary. Although, you don't have to pick someone else who ran in the primaries. You typically have some sort of strategic approach to, I'm going to shore up part of the demographics that I struggle with by this vice presidential pick. Maybe that's the state. Maybe it's that they represent Biden's pretty conservative Democrat. So maybe he's thinking, hey, this helps me shore up part of the liberal edge, or maybe it's, hey, we want to double down on making sure we win the suburban women vote, which is a group of people that Kamala Harris appeals to very well. Law and order, prosecutorial authority meets female candidate resonates really well with suburban women. Maybe he was trying to shore that up. Regardless of the reason, this is who he selected. And she's not, well, his whole presidency has not been as in the limelight as, God, I don't even know what it used to be like, right? Like Bush, we were at war the whole time. Obama, I feel like, was just liked being in front of the camera, and Trump is like a just rolling tabloid. So it seems like Biden was never in front of the camera. All this to say, though, we get to this point and he resigns, and it's not unprecedented. This is shades of this occurred with, I think, LBJ.
Well, he's still president, acting president from until the end of his term,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He's not running.
I shouldn't say resigned. He has discontinued his campaign.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack here, right? So you've got his debate did not go well. I found it pretty fascinating. There's so much to unpack here. So there's just a running narrative. Whatever Fox News tells everybody to be afraid of just becomes truth over time. So there's just this running narrative for a long time that Biden's got dementia. I encourage anybody to do a little research into what dementia is like. It's not saying mostly the correct thing and flipping some words around or speaking softly, but there are different components of memory recall that affect speed, and clearly some of that's been lost, or it's almost like he knows, but you could tell he's just like having a hard time putting his words together, and he's historically had a bit of a speech impediment. So, but I'm not going to deny it looked really bad. I still liked his answers to questions much better than the guy who didn't answer the questions at all. But I think people were already kind of getting there, and this just confirmed it. And he hadn't really been convincing in secondary effects or attempts to try and dispel those concerns, right? By going in friendly interviews and basically reading from a teleprompter. Regardless, I didn't think this was going to happen. I didn't think he was going to drop out. Primarily because I thought people don't really like Kamala Harris that much, but you can't really nominate anybody else because you potentially lose your 2 huge demographics, women and the African American vote, that the Democratic Party probably can't win without. So, but he endorsed her like immediately, and all of the people. So they've got the conventions coming up, right? And this is unprecedented in modern times when you could go through the whole set of primaries, but not unprecedented in the sense that the rules of the DNC don't have contingencies and plan for this. And with the DNC, you literally vote for a delegate that votes on your behalf anyway. So
what's DNC?
The Democratic National Convention, the Democratic Party. Think of it that way.
Yeah.
So these delegates are going to vote anyway. Now the person they were sort of entrusted to vote for is no longer running, so they can do whatever they want.
That's
It's
never happened
literally
before, has it?
it's literally a clubhouse. Um, I cannot remember the exact details of LBJ dropping out, but he did, and I think it was after he had lost one primary or something. But but yeah, this hasn't happened since the parties have existed this way. There's another president that died, like not president, candidate that died while running. It's just been like 100 years. I can't remember. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that a person winning a primary and then dropping out means that there has not been a winner of a primary. And so what do you expect them to do? They're going to pick this way. Now, I think a lot of
Um,
people have a problem with someone dropping out after being encouraged to drop out. But I don't know what you want them to do. They wouldn't give him any more funding. They don't have to give him money.
that's an interesting question. So, I actually was doing a little research before the podcast, and one of the questions that kind of came up that like I thought was interesting was all the money that was given specifically for Biden. It
It's
like was
incorrect.
it
It's incorrect. No, it's
okay?
same bank account. It is the Biden Harris ticket.
Okay, so
So
what if
effectively, the money that is already in their campaign account can only be used by Biden or Harris.
so if they go with like Gavin Newsom, that
Yeah.
money has to be returned?
No, that's Harris's money. To use for campaigning. Now she could willingly give it back to give or not give it back, give it to the DNC. And I had heard a lot of rumors about Harris. I'm a big Pete Buttigieg fan. I thought perhaps this could be a shot for him. I don't think he will be a VP candidate at all. I don't think America could handle uh, two my he's not. I guess he's two progressive lifestyle candidates would never work. We're not going to get a ticket with a black woman and a gay man in America today. But
Are you saying is that Gavin Newsom or who's the guy that's
no, Pete Buttigieg, I think, is probably the future of the Democratic Party, but he's a gay man. Do you know who Pete Buttigieg is? He's the
no?
Secretary of Transportation right now. He's a former governor of Indiana. He's a Rhodes Scholar and a former naval or CIA intelligence officer. I can't remember. He's like the most like ridiculously decorated career politically and for his age. He's also very young. I think he's probably 40, 42, something like that. Basically, he was born this generation, our generation. You're a millennial, aren't you?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this. Quick side fact. Barack Obama is the only president since 1992 that wasn't born in a 7-year period in the 1940s.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, like, what's like the Clintons, Bush, two, and Trump and Biden are all born within like 5-year period of each other. That's 30 years of politics. 32. Anyways, I thought I think he actually won the first primary last year in Iowa, which is just incredible. He did end up dropping out, but all of this to say, they're going to get together and vote, and I really thought Newsom or potentially Whitmer, which is the governor from Michigan, could have pretty strong showings. But everybody that could have potentially run against her endorsed her. So yeah, they could vote for somebody else, but everybody else that they would vote for basically voted for her. So I think it's as good as wrapped up at this point. Um, the real question I think we're kind of turning to is who's her running mate going to be? And this goes back to that topic we were just discussing about why you pick certain VP candidates. I really feel like the senator from Arizona is probably the front runner. I don't know if
You
do you know? Go ahead.
No, but I was thinking back to the swing states, and I know Gavin Newsom's California, So he'd probably make a
Yeah.
better presidential candidate, but you're getting
Yeah,
California anyway.
you'd never. So, okay, on one hand, like, I don't know if all these people dropped out or endorsed her because, the party leadership is saying, hey, everyone's got to rally here. Uh, Trump's an astronomically bad, bad candidate for a variety of reasons, but he's very polarizing. And I think, well, okay, so like, if you care about protecting the integrity of the Supreme Court at all, it'd be very bad to have another Trump candidacy or presidency. So maybe they're all just rallying around her, or maybe they're all thinking, this is probably a losing effort, and I don't. It's pretty hard to recover from a presidential candidacy loss. So maybe they're like, hey, we're just going to let you take this bullet, and we'll try again in 4 years. I don't know, but yeah, it would be a terrible idea to have two from California. Um, the front runners are ostensibly uh, Mark Kelly from Arizona, um, Shapiro, governor from Pennsylvania. Those two both make a lot of sense because Pennsylvania, the Shapiro's very popular. Won a pretty not close election. It's just that he's young in his gubernatorial term, but he's Jewish. He's from the probably most important state. Checks a lot of boxes. There's also, I can't remember if he's a governor or senator from North Carolina and the governor from Kentucky. Those are kind of the guys on the board right now. I think it's going to be Mark Kelly because he just kind of stands as Mark Kelly, by the way, is the senator from Arizona.
Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. He's also an astronaut and a
It's
naval
pretty cool.
test pilot. Yeah, he's like an incredibly decorated war veteran and sort of American hero from most respects. Uh, I think it's his first term as senator, but great pick in theory, right? Because he's an older white man. Although I think he's actually close to her age. He looks every bit of 60, and she looks like she's maybe 50, but she's also like 59, 60. Anyways, what I'm getting at is like he really has a candid ability to appeal to maybe right-leaning moderates, and
Yeah.
they're very in play because if you're not like morally compromised and a Republican, maybe you're thinking, I don't want to vote for this person. Wow, he makes me feel like this guy probably more closely represents the things that I care about. And there's been a negative. The Trump assassination attempt had a pretty strong boost for his campaign. Mark Kelly's wife was shot in an episode of political violence years ago as well. So like I feel like you kind of negate some of that draw.
Yeah.
I fully expect it to be him.
Okay. Let's see. I wanted to ask. Um, One thing I was thinking about with Biden dropping out was before he dropped out, with all the whole Biden dementia thing, I
Yeah.
don't listen to a lot of like news around politics. Like what I mean is Fox News, CNN, just any of that. I don't do that, but I listen to sports talk people, and some of them every once in a while talk about politics. And so
Oh,
that's
right,
kind of
right,
where
right.
I'm always interested in what they think because I've been listening to them for like 10 years. And so if somebody like Colin Cowherd all of a sudden starts talking about politics, I'm like, okay, well, I actually care what he says. And
That's a fascinating approach to
I
news.
know, but I feel like I know him so well because I've been listening to him for 10 years. You know what I mean? He talks about
Yeah.
any number of things. And he's definitely a Democrat, but he's a moderate. I'd say he's a moderate, but he usually leans. He says that he is
Cowherd, you mean?
Colin Cowherd.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I know who you're talking about. I just want to make sure that's
What
who
did you
you're
call him?
talking about. Colin Cowherd?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, but anyway, he says that whether or not Biden had any issues, it didn't look good, and that was a
Yeah,
problem
yeah.
for the Democrats. and that it was kind of just
Po-
accepted that Biden has something going on, which isn't great, and that it was looking great for Trump because of that. Because Trump's whole thing was going to be, hey, I don't have those issues. I'm big, strong personality, and Biden is obviously not fit to be president. And to me, that seems like an easy win.
he
So
had
with
he had
Biden
some
dropping
pretty
out,
serious gaffes that, like, some of the points that he needed to be driving home the whole time, he only said once or twice, and like messed up. Said something about like defeating Medicare, like he was fumbling for the word and picked the wrong word, but like that should have been your home run line, and instead you said something negative about something else. Like, he could
yeah,
have just gotten up on stage and just basically ignored every question and said, like, Trump gets up there and they ask a question and he's like, there are rapists coming over the border, and it's hilarious because like there was no one asked you about that.
right.
um and it's weird because they had this rule, right, when no one's going to talk over each other, we're going to turn your mic off. And I think it actually helped him because I don't think people like that he's just rambling on all the time when other people are talking. But when you had him do it in turn, it didn't seem as bad. Well, Biden could have just gotten up there and said, look, like, all of these inflationary problems that we have, right? Like, so the big ticket items this election are going to be um, inflation. It's going to be, people are going to call it the economy. It's inflation. The economy, I saw a metric today. I'll send you the link if you want to add it. Showing GDP is literally at a all-time world record high. So our economy, by most metrics, is better than it has ever been. But inflation is what people feel. Things all cost more, um, which is literally the direct result of a bunch of printed money that occurred under the Trump administration. So all he needed to do was say, "You're right. It was bad. You caused it." That's like issue number 1A or 1B for I guess we'd call them the moderates, right? Um, Second issue for them, disproportionately for the right when compared to the left, but probably the second biggest issue for people in the middle is going to be immigration, and that's all Trump talked about the whole time. So you had a bipartisan approved legislative effort the other, wow, God, what was it, like 4 or 6 months ago? Um, and then Trump came out and like railroaded it and got people to vote against it because, quote, I don't want this to get fixed while he's still in office. So there's another counterpoint. Like, why you had like three things, and the third biggest issue, that by far the largest social issue, and the one that I think is responsible for all of the polling errors of the midterms, is that this just completely bankrupt Supreme Court reversed 50, 55 years worth of precedent in overturning Roe. And it apparently really pissed off all the people who you told were second class citizens. And so, like, God, what was it? There's like a special election in Alabama that Republicans lost. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, dude, all you got to do is just scream and yell about abortion every time you have a chance to talk. Make that your immigration thing. But instead, he tried to answer questions, and he's just not as quick. And he had to actually, answer the questions instead of talking. And so it did not play to his strengths. Um,
Well,
and it really doesn't matter what his mental faculties are. What mattered is it looked like he didn't have a shot to win at this point. So he resigned. He discontinued his reelection effort.
okay,
Candidacy.
so you would think that obviously that's really bad. And you even said earlier that maybe, not for sure, but maybe the Democrats are just giving this to Kamala because it's potentially a losing effort and they want to have the losing effort
Well,
be
no,
her
I
shot.
mean, there's absolutely no doubt that they think. I mean, Biden doesn't have to do anything they tell him to do. He could have just continued his campaign effort. He had to voluntarily choose not to pursue it. Um, and there's no doubt in my mind that she has a better chance than he did. So,
Well, that's what I was going to say is maybe this is actually a good thing for the Democrats that Biden did drop out because I kind of just decided Trump was winning, and I don't need to pay much attention to any of this. Like,
Yeah.
and especially with like when you scroll, I don't have TikTok, but I use Instagram, and sometimes I look at the reels, and it must be part of my feed that I get the Biden mashup that looks really bad. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
young
Yeah.
people see that. And we don't really I didn't watch the debate, and I don't watch interviews with Biden, but I probably 2 weeks later get some mashup of the very worst part that just makes him look bad. And that kind of sticks with me because I see that a lot, you know?
Yeah.
And so I believe you when you say like people are taking things out of context and it's not as bad and he doesn't have
Well,
dementia.
I'm not even. I am saying he doesn't have dementia, but I agree. It didn't look good. I think it's problematic that we accept what the other candidate looked like. But hey,
Well,
we've been
obviously, I
voting.
don't like Trump. You know that.
Oh
But I just
yeah,
think
I
this
mean,
could be a good thing because now they might be able to get somebody in there that has a chance to win. And also,
yeah. It's
Trump's
from the
whole
party's
strategy was
perspective.
like
You have
Biden's
to have a
weak.
winnable, an electable candidate, right? Like you have to have it.
Well, Trump's going to have
But
to change his whole strategy too. Like, because it was
well,
really easy
it's
to be
pretty
like, look
fascinating.
at Biden, he can't do it.
It's super fascinating. Yeah, because he built his whole what do you call it? His whole attack ad platform was based off of listen to this crazy fucking lunatic. He's so old, he's not here anymore. And he drove that home so hard, so thoroughly for so long. And then the guy resigned, and now everyone's thinking, and they are, oh God, you're the oldest presidential candidate in history now.
Yeah.
And
Now
you
he's
sound
the
like a
old guy.
crazy person. Half the time you sound like a crazy person. Guy's falling asleep during his trial. Man, it kind of looks like you're maybe too old. And so not only do they have to try and walk that all back, what they're going to end up doing, and what I've already seen is they're trying to package this as some conspiracy, and Kamala Harris should be blamed for it, which I suppose is one angle you could take if you want to piggyback off of a bunch of attack ads against a candidate who's no longer worth attacking. Apparently, they literally have like a painting at their headquarters on the wall about like Biden sucking, and I'm like, dude, your whole platform was built off of not liking a guy. God, it's pretty fascinating. But I don't know. And you know, I think we're gonna find out. Um, we're gonna find out a couple of things. We're gonna find out how motivated to be politically involved the is it Gen Z the the
Yeah.
18 to 26-year olds are. It has looked, and it looked in the last election, like they're much more politically involved than the generation before them. And we're also going to find out. I read something the other day suggesting that for the most part, the abortion issue had kind of been settled in places where the state could settle it themselves, like several conservative states, Ohio, for example, immediately passed abortion referendums. So they're not up to it's a protected right in those states explicitly. So are people going to be as motivated in those states? Probably not, unless it becomes a big part of their platform and their ad buys going forward. And I think it will. I think it has to be. I think it's going to be packaged together with some of the other Looney Tunes Supreme Court decisions of the last 6 months, but we'll see. I don't know how tuned into that people are. I do think it's been energizing though for most of the left, in the sense that like you basically just got a new candidate that there
Yeah.
hasn't been a lot of negative anything running against. So now for the second election in a row, the left kind of has a candidate that doesn't have a bunch of negative baggage. I mean, every politician does, but they have been out of the negative limelight recently, and Trump really can't get out of it. So we'll see.
Yeah, I
I don't
think it's
know.
interesting. I am more interested now than I think I've been ever. I mean, I really enjoy talking to you about it too, but um, it's fascinating to me. And I just think that that was probably a hard decision for Biden. like probably an ego. Like he probably just didn't want to. Maybe he was made. The whole thing is fascinating to me to think like, was that his decision? Was he forced? But
Sure.
either way,
Yeah.
like this is going to affect his legacy. Like people will remember this when they think of Biden.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a pretty fascinating there's obviously just a disconnect politically happening. There's an increase in polarization, largely due to the 24-hour news cycle and the siloing effect of social media giving you more and more disproportionate things that you should be afraid of, and your brain psychologically being geared towards flight or fight. So this is bad. They're telling me this is bad all the time. Now I hate this thing, right? That is increasing with its focus and with its, what's the word I'm looking for? With its vigilance in terms of what people are exposed to at a rate that may not ever decrease. So, yeah, I say all of that to kind of give this backdrop that like people kind of believe more than I believe they used to, that the other side's just lying, and there is no truth ever. I mean, it kind of got enshrined into our political dialogue with the comment "fake news, you are fake news," but this has been trending for a while, and so I don't think people on the right are willing to admit it. To the extent that I've spoken to them, they're not. But Bush is, by most, considered to be one of the worst presidents we've ever had. They will not admit that. They think that that's just those crazy liberal political scientists deciding
who
that.
who says that? I didn't know that.
The overwhelming majority of political scientists and in the political science community believe that Bush is among like probably the worst five or so presidents we've ever had. Um, Definitely got
Wow.
us involved in decades-long war after literally having one of his top cabinet officials lie about having evidence of. I mean, we invaded two countries under false pretenses and spent 20 years, $1 trillion, and 50,000 American lives fighting a war against a thing that can't be beat because it's not an entity, it's a concept. The war on drugs and the war on terror. Tell me what victory looks like. I don't know. I don't. When are we going to get all of terror's land? When are we going to force the government of drugs to submit to us? These are just like garbage sales techniques for violence. But all of that to say is that that's what people will remember Bush for. And Trump's got a much worse set of things. Obviously, he wins another election and comes out and now that presidents are essentially above reproach, and he can replace all of the. You should just read up on Project 2025 if you'd like to know the Republican platform's goal to restructure government as we know it, such that their minority, unpopular opinions can stay in power longer, I guess. I don't know what it'll look like after another candidacy, but I know that if he were to never win again, he would be remembered for having his followers attack the federal government after his vice president refused to certify the election whereby he lost. Like that is what this man will be remembered for. And people on the right can come and tell you that. I'm not saying that's from my perspective of I'm clearly left leaning, right? I'm saying this from the perspective of like people really remember presidents for like one or two things.
Yeah.
Did you do something really good, or try to do something really good,
I think of
or did you?
Obamacare, with
Right,
Obama.
right. Which I could make an incredibly strong argument for being a complete perversion of what it was sold to us as and supposed to be. I think it's kind of the worst of both worlds. You have single payer and you have to use the existing insurance infrastructure. So basically, everybody has to lose now. That was what happened. Regardless, regardless, that's what he'll be remembered for, and being the first black president. That's that's not trivial. Bush will be remembered for 9/11 and using it as a pretext to invade countries and further destabilize the entirety of the Middle East, leading to a never-ending candidacy of people who hate us. Great. I guess we have justifications for future wars if we want them. Clinton, I don't really know what. I feel like Clinton's probably remembered for the impeachment trial by some. Clinton, by most metrics, is actually one of the more popular presidents in history. But I think that I think that he's got a bit of a black spot there. It's like Nixon. What's Nixon remembered for?
Well, he got kicked out.
No, he didn't. He resigned.
Okay.
It's an
Well,
important distinction. It
he
was
resigned
impending.
right. Yeah, it was like he did it to kind of.
Right. He was
Yeah.
impeached, but he was not confirmed
Okay.
in the Senate. For by
Well,
the
and
way,
then
I guess.
Watergate, right? Like I don't know what he did.
Well,
I don't even know what.
it's pretty fascinating. So, the Watergate tapes, right, are this evidence that's used in his trial. But this immunity case with Trump was pretty problematic reasoning as to the things that basically the president's immune from prosecution for things done in his official capacity, which wasn't really at issue in the case, but they decided they should just put that on the record anyway. But more problematic is ultimately you can't use evidence of any of these other things that occurred while he was president to determine whether or not it is a part of his official acts. So you can go and solicit bribes from foreign countries in exchange for government aid, or you can tape your political rivals and use it to manipulate your reelection odds, all from the office of the presidency, and it's presumptively immune. It's literally enshrined. So this is me saying Nixon would, under today's Supreme Court ruling, would have effectively been unimpeachable. But yeah,
Oh,
do
I
with
see what you're
that what
saying.
you will. But yeah, Nixon's clearly known for that, right? As things stand, people will remember Trump for, well, either COVID, which, he didn't cause, he just downplayed. And then, I don't know. I think that's probably a pretty challenging thing for people to deal with, but it's pretty fascinating in the same vein, because I think 9/11 probably got Bush reelected. I don't know how you bungle COVID. Like, all you had to do was do reasonably well. He tried at the end to just write everybody checks, but it didn't work. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what Biden's remembered for. This is probably going to be part of it, but
I don't know what Biden's big thing is either. I mean, I don't know. So
don't you like not having to read about your president in the news all the time? I do.
yeah. I want to ask about the Trump shooting.
Yeah.
Somebody went on Joe Rogan, and Joe was talking about how he's not. I think Joe wanted to be really careful and say that it was not a hit. Like, he didn't want it out there that
Yeah,
he
I
was.
read this today too. And I don't think he got shot in the ear. I think it looked like it was some kind of like ricochet off the teleprompter,
Oh, no, no.
but
I'm talking about Joe. I'm not talking about whether the bullet hit him or not.
oh,
I'm
really?
saying,
Okay.
so Joe was saying that he doesn't want to say it was an like hired hit, but he feels like all the, like, if it was a hired hit, this is what it would look like, basically. So he just
That
doesn't have any
absolutely makes no
evidence.
fucking sense whatsoever.
So you
You're
don't
gonna
think, you
you're
think
gonna
this
hire
was
some 22-year-old kid to shoot the president with iron sights? Like, didn't even have a scope on his gun. This is not a professional job.
okay? Okay, no, I'm glad you're on here, but Joe Rogan was saying that.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe Rogan's thing is that he doesn't say anything. He just invites people on his show and endorses whatever they have to say. But
Well, that's gonna be my thing, man.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm going to get more and more radical on here, and people are going to be like, what Trevor Roberts said, and you're like, I didn't say that. That was Maxwell, the crazy guy. I don't know. I've had a lot of. Obviously, I'm not a Trump fan, but it's really, really problematic that can take place. And I can't imagine what the fallout would have been had he been shot. Uh, I think we're getting more and more divided and contentious. I could see there being quite a bit of violent um, backlash from that. Who knows? I think it looks pretty bad for the Secret Service. It does look, for all intents and purposes, like some random cop walking up to the guy, rushed his shot, and that's the only reason it didn't work. Um, I have some
Like, what do
theories
you mean?
about.
Accidentally bumped him right when he did pulled the trigger?
No, he like there was an officer who I guess like went to check it out because people had seen it. He was climbing up on the roof with the gun, I guess, and so this officer climbed up the ladder. The guy turned and pointed at him, and then he went back down, and then he turned and took the shot. So, and that's, don't quote me on that. That's my understanding of what happened. It seems like he took a shot in a rush rather than took his time, set it up, and presumably is why he missed. But there's a lot of things. So for all intents and purposes, the record appears to show that this person was relatively conservative to the extent that you can associate his interests and membership in organizations with his political leanings. Um,
You talking about the
what do we
shooter?
take? Yeah, what do we take from that? Because I've heard everything from that's manufactured evidence to give this as a talking point, so fake news, or is it indicative, in my opinion, possibly indicative of, to a large extent, Trump has garnered universal support from a very extreme wing of it's not even necessarily conservatism. It is, let's just call a part of that wing like racists. I'm not saying they all are, but racists don't vote for Democrats. They do vote for Trump. I'm not saying everyone who votes for Trump is, but so like this is an extreme party that I don't know that they would have voted for Republicans 10 years ago, but they're definitely going to vote for Trump. So as that wing grows, and I'm not associating all of these things with something as incendiary as racism, but you see portions of disenfranchisement happen with different demographic groups. Like I have read recently that younger men are swinging to the right a little more as of the last two cycles, and I can totally understand why. Some of the progressive movements have almost have a narrative that appears to blame men for a lot of things, and we already have men don't have the same support for some of their social problems. So I can see them feeling isolated and attacked and drifting towards that type of identity politics, right? So, like, let's just say that he's kind of got a populist umbrella of different groups that might feel marginalized for their beliefs not feeling represented because maybe they're bad, or just because the left thinks they're the boogeyman, or because they feel like he tells it like it is. So I want to vote for someone because that's how I want to be. I want to tell it like it is, but I can't. I don't have the platform. Regardless, what I'm getting at is that is not the moderate part of the Republican Party as we have historically known it to be. I wouldn't even say that it's necessarily aligned with the religious undertones of the Republican Party. But then he goes out and has a debate and is clearly trying to walk back some positions he's had and some things that he has said to be more appealing to the moderates in the general election. Well, if and then there's the whole Epstein thing, which I'm just not read up on enough, but I know is out in the ether right now as a topic. Um, if you have some members of your party, and I know that there's a big, I can't remember what it's called. There's the whole like Pizzagate, they're molesting kids and Trump is out to stop them, right? I could see that, or him trying to walk back hilariously what his party's platform is on abortion and a variety of things that in the last month or so, he's tried to pivot on or has been in the news for in contravention of what he has been heralded as the hero of by some sects of his platform. And I can totally make sense of why someone who was previously a supporter thinks I need to kill you.
Oh, that
Like
does make sense. Yeah.
you said you're going to stop all abortion, and now you're saying you don't have a problem with it, or you're supposed to be persecuting the child molesters, but now I see a reference to you in these Epstein files. Like, these are volatile members on the fringe of this party that I think only recently felt like they had a party, and I can totally see a supporter going a little crazy, if you can call that person a supporter. I don't know. I really can't make sense of it outside of that.
Okay,
And
so
for all intents
go
and
ahead.
purposes, the guy was really young. He was like 22, right?
Did he? Is he dead?
Might have only been
Shooter?
20. Yeah, they shot him.
I thought I saw a picture of him that made him look like. Did he have long hair or short hair?
I can't remember. The pictures I've seen floating around are like him from high school, and he looks like a high schooler having a rough time.
Yeah. Okay. I think that must have been it. I think I saw one picture with short hair and one picture with long hair. And I haven't read anything about him, so I think I got the wrong idea, but that makes sense. It's hard for me to really gauge like how much people know about this. I mean, Alex and I, neither of us listen are really into it. Like, I think if I asked Alex a question about this, she wouldn't know either. And her and I are parents of two young kids, and we don't have a lot of social interactions with other people our age right now. So, but do you think a lot of people, like most people, know that the shooter was a Republican?
I mean, I'm not. I'm explicitly not representing myself as believing him to be a Republican. I'm not going to take a stance on that. I'm not really sure it matters. But to the extent we have evidence, it suggests that he was, or at least a Trump supporter. Um, I don't know that people have seen that news in the way that I have. I obviously the polarizing ends of our news reporting is not going to cover things the same way. They're going to omit relevant details that the other side might fixate on, and that goes for both of them. So I have no idea, um, but I suspect that they do. Like, so I have this theory, right, about where you get your news, and it's harder and harder to find news sources that don't seem like they're intentionally incendiary. Um, I would say I probably think like BBC or The Economist are two of the better places to get your news from, but because I don't feel like there's a central place to get it anymore, I instead try to just participate in both. So, like on Reddit, I'm in the conservative and the liberal, the Republican, the Democrat subreddits, right? And
Yeah.
they were all talking about this detail, um, either as "Can you believe this? He was a Republican," or "Of course they're going to say he's a Republican." Like, but the narrative existed in both. So I
Oh, I see.
presume it was being reported on by both sides. It was a big topic for like a week.
Well, please know I am glad you are stating like what your opinion is and what your opinion isn't, and I apologize if I don't ever mean to make it seem
Oh,
like
you're
I'm
good.
assuming anything. But the reason I brought it up was because I was under the assumption that it was a Democrat or a liberal or
Yeah,
somebody on the left, and that was just so like I wonder how many people, and I just sort of felt like when it first happened and what I saw on social media, it felt like um a war cry. Like it felt like a really good thing for Trump at first. I mean, obviously,
I think it ultimately still will be.
yeah, it's like a rallying thing where everybody can kind of get around him and be like, even moderates, like even me, I'm not a Trump supporter, but when that first happened, my emotional reaction was like, that's not okay. And I'm really glad he lived.
Yeah,
He like stands up and pumps his fists in the air. I mean, it was
hmm
just like, wow, that's pretty
yeah,
badass.
very picturesque moment there for
And
sure.
literally bullets just went by his head, and he like doesn't cower in fear. He just stands right back up and is pumping his fists in the air. And like we've all seen, JFK, Abraham Lincoln, like that's terrible. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't know, like
It's pretty crazy, you know. I just have no idea how the Secret Service wasn't on top of this, but it happened, and I'm not willing to say this is fake news. I believe that it actually happened. Um,
you don't think there's any chance that it was a hired hit? You think it was just a kid that decided to do this?
I mean, anything's possible, man. A bunch of like crazy rednecks tried to literally take over the Capitol building. It's like people, if they're people feel empowered to do lots of things. I feel like if you were going to coordinate and try to pay for something like this is probably not the guy I would hire. Uh, you know, so I tend towards not believing that. I think that there's a simpler
Can I?
solution, and when there's a
Can
simpler solution, yeah, go
I?
ahead.
I only spent like 2 minutes on this, but in Game of Thrones, um, in like early on in season one, there's this cat's paw guy that comes in through the window, and he's got this dagger and he's trying to kill
Yeah, yeah,
Bran.
it's like the first episode, right?
Yeah, and and he looks at Caitlin Stark and says, "You're not supposed to be here." And then the wolf kills him, and he ends up failing. But it's never revealed who actually hired him, and you have to like go find super nerds that have created, really deep lore videos, and they're still just theories, and they've got a lot of evidence that's like in between the lines in the book. There's nothing on the show that will ever tell you who did that, and you think you might know because Peter Baelish said it was
Mm.
Tyrion's, you know, and he
It says
kind of,
dagger, right?
yeah, but then we find out later it was really Peter Baelish's dagger, but Peter like wasn't there, like didn't know anything about that whole situation. Like Peter was in
Yeah.
King's Landing, he wouldn't have known that Jamie pushed him out the window, and he like somebody wanted to kill him because he saw Jamie and Cersei making out, and so. But anyway, I have a theory on who did it, but he paid the cat's paw with one of like five pieces of Valyrian steel. Like another piece of lore is that Tywin Lannister tried to give somebody like a lordship and a castle that he was like a nobody to, or it
Uh-huh.
was like a lesser house that had none of that. And it was like a huge lordship, lots of lands, and a castle would have made them like rich forever if he could just have their Valyrian steel sword. And the person said no, because that's how valuable Valyrian steel is. And the person that paid the cat's paw guy to kill Bran used a Valyrian steel dagger to pay him. Like that's what he got in return, which is worth more than like any, only the top like five families in all of Westeros have that kind of money, and this nobody got this dagger. So
Right, 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 right.
that's supposed to be a clue of like who would not realize the value of what they were using to pay this nobody, and like they also chose not a very skilled person to do it.
Yeah.
um, but
I mean,
anyway,
it's probably worth noting it's also a fake story.
yeah, 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 but
Like the guy who shot JFK hit him 3 times in the matter of like 6 seconds in a moving car.
okay.
And it's because he was a former Marine sniper. So,
So you
like, I
know
think
who
that
shot
there's,
JFK?
oh my God, get out of here with this.
I don't know.
Yes, we,
I
yeah,
thought it was
yeah,
no.
Lee
It's.
Harvey Oswald shot JFK.
I thought it wasn't known.
Oh, well, they certainly arrested a guy.
Well,
Yeah, I suppose so this is the problem with conspiracies in general, and how the more inclined we are to doubt everything, the more it empowers us to believe whatever it is we really want to believe.
yeah. Okay. I only wanted to talk about that for a minute, but I
No,
want
you're
to
good.
ask you about the Gulf of Tonkin. You put together.
Man, it's pretty funny. Go ahead. What did I
Well,
say?
can I want you to? I did. I wrote down and highlighted some stuff, so I can read it out to give everybody
Yeah,
listening a
why don't you
background.
just
You
give
want
us
me
the
to do it?
background on that? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read the background, and then you kind of tell me why you wanted to talk about this and how it's relevant. But just so anybody's listening that might not know what the Gulf of Tonkin is, um, this is courtesy of Chat GPT. Um, The Gulf of Tonkin incident refers to two separate events involving naval forces of North Vietnam and the United States in the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam in August of 1964. The incidents are historically significant because they led to the escalation of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. There's two incidents. The first incident, the USS Maddox, a U.S. Navy destroyer, is reported being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The Maddox fired back and was supported by aircraft from nearby carrier, damaging some of the Vietnamese boats. Second incident, 2 days later, the U.S. Maddox and another destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, reported a second attack. However, subsequent investigations support the second attack might not have actually occurred or it was misinterpreted. In response to the incidents, U.S. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The resolution granted President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to assist in any Southeast Asian country whose government was considered to be jeopardized by communist aggression. It effectively allowed the president to escalate U.S. military involvement in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war.
Yeah, so obviously I had thought of this at the same time as I think it was the day after the shooting, the day of the shooting when I sent you that stuff. Just because it was a it was a false flag event, right? And used as justification to further certain actions as defensive when in reality they were aggressive. And so I don't know that this is a direct parallel, but there's to the extent that there's a conspiracy that somehow, and I just don't see a way that this is possible, right? But that somehow Trump wanted to look like he had been attacked, um, it would fall under that same auspice of I was provoked. Everything I'm going to do in response is defensive. I'm not attacking them. I'm defending myself. I can't really see with the way that it took place that being plausible. Um, I could probably see to the extent that there's a nefarious actor in the Republican Party thinking, well, if he hits him, we have all the ammo we need, and if he misses, then either way, we've won the next election. And that for about a week, that was kind of the narrative, right? Is that like this guy just won re-election, he got shot at and they missed. Um, Again, I don't really subscribe to any of those theories, but I think it's why I was drawing that parallel. I do think history in general is fascinating.
Yeah, I do too.
I think that we're just far enough removed from like the '60s and the '70s that people don't realize that we had like a legitimate, semi-constant source of news reporting. So like we felt informed about what was happening as a public, and we were lied to sometimes, and we used that to justify different things, or at least they used that to appease us in pursuing different things. I hope what you take from a lot of these conversations with me is, insofar as they relate to politics, is I have all the same sensationalized feelings that people have about different things, and I have things that stand out to me personally as things we should be more afraid of. Like I think the war on drugs and the militarization of police is pretty near and dear to me for a variety of things I've pursued academically. But I try to keep it rooted. I mean, I feel like I'm very informed about changes that are happening institutionally in our legal system. Uh, they're unprecedented. I think they're really problematic. I do want to sound alarm bells on that. But everything else, to a certain extent, like you were all susceptible to the same things. So I do feel like there's not an easy way out of that problem, right? Like at best, I heard someone on the news one time say, I think it was I think it was a guest on Fox News who was unfortunately not like really engaging with their questions, but trying to sell like a message about, the only thing that will save America is like more empathy, and essentially saying the day when we all realize we have more in common that makes us different is the day that we can get past, being played against each other. Uh, or you know what? I mean, Jon Stewart, I'll never forget him going on Crossfire and basically attacking the two. Crossfire was like a show on maybe a CNN. There was a similar show on Fox for a while called Hannity and Combs, where they basically portrayed themselves as being a liberal and a conservative, and they would argue about things. And he went on the show and was just like attacking them, saying like, "You're pitting everybody against each other. Like you're the reason America is declining. Like you two in particular. Like this." And I that narrative has always really resonated with me because ultimately, like we're always going to be afraid of the things that we're the most afraid of. It just so happens people have figured out how to tell you that everything they want you to not like is that thing. And I don't really know that there's an easy way out, right? Like you have to get out there and engage with people who are different from you. And it gets harder and harder all the time. So
Okay, hey buddy, with the Gulf of Tonkin, was
he's
the
like to
re-
go back.
I know I want to go back to this. Like, I was like, is the reason you are bringing this up because like they maybe faked a second attack, or like is it because
um,
like obviously they got a lot out of the second attack, whether it was real or
I
not?
think at the point in time when I said we should talk about these things, that was part of what I was wanting to get across is that like fabricating negative events and using those fabrications as justification for escalation is
That makes sense.
really a tool
But
as old as time.
yeah, but you've seen the videos, right, where the bullets look like they're going by his head.
I have not seen a video where you can see a bullet. No. But maybe there's a slow-mo version where we can see a bullet. I see him
It might be
duck.
maybe
Yeah.
it's a simulation. I saw a video where you see like a
Oh,
flash.
yeah, okay. I mean, I haven't, but I
I don't
believe you.
know. I don't know if it's like real. I This is like so hard to.
It doesn't matter. Let's choose to believe that it happened this way. Like I've seen recreations of it. Yeah.
Okay. And it looks like whether it hits him or not, it's like right next to his face. So
Yeah, presumably it struck his ear, right? Yeah.
I don't think he had anything to do with it.
No,
I mean,
I don't. I mean, I don't believe anybody had anything to do with it beyond the person who did it. But for all intents and purposes, if there was going to be a false flag, it would look like. Well, I don't even think it would look like this. I was just kind of thinking this would be a good thing to talk about because there's a lot. Oh my God, there's a case from years ago. I think it's Ant-Man Scalia, which not a justice I particularly like, but used the line it's something like the constant selling of a parade of imaginary horribles, and this idea that like this is like heavily entrenched in the narrative today, right? I mean, the left would have you believe that Trump is like in bed with Putin. Um, it is odd sometimes to see how friendly they are to each other. It's also odd to see conservatives, after spending 30 years in the Cold War, are now like, Russia's not that bad. We totally shouldn't help our allies fight them. But regardless, the other side, right, is they're sending rapists over the border, and they're invading our country, which we totally have an immigration problem. Um, but I don't know that there's a bunch of like rapists and murderers just coming to America to kill Americans. Um, and I don't think that, uh, like I was saying, to both sides of this are trying to tell you that this other side is in bed with the enemy. Uh, I mean, if Republicans wanted to stop immigration, they'd go after the people who employ them. If you couldn't come to America legally and make a bunch of money, you wouldn't do it. If it wasn't legitimately better here, unless you were a citizen, they wouldn't come. So we can scream and shout about the border, or we can go after, people who are employing illegals and prosecute them. I hope everyone's prepared to pay more for produce.
Yeah. Um, let's talk about the fairness doctrine and the state decisis. How do you say that?
Stare decisis.
Stare decisis.
Stare decisis. I feel like I'm saying that wrong. I should know. Um, it's Latin. I don't know what it means in Latin, but it's basically precedent. And it just speaks to the utter corruption of our Supreme Court. It doesn't initially look like corruption. It just looked like we have 3 appointees under Trump, one genuine textualist who's like, words mean literally what they mean in the dictionary, and that is how I make decisions on what the law is. And then we've got Kavanaugh, that was Gorsuch. Kavanaugh's, probably a little more conservative than I would like, but I don't know that his tenure as a justice has been highly suspect. Comey Barrett is absolutely like a little bit of a religious nutjob. I don't know that I really want someone that entrenched in religion deciding what the country has to do. And Alito is absolutely in that same camp. So with Roe, they come out and basically just say, let me take a step back. Okay, so you've got branches of government that have independent authority to do X, Y, and Z, and they have checks over each other, and they have powers that inherently balance each other. The executive branch's ability to affect how the law is enforced is a check on the legislature saying, or is a balance on the legislature passing the laws. But there's also a check in the form of a veto on the passage of laws as a whole. There are fewer checks and balances, I believe, on the Supreme Court because they serve they ultimately serve as long as they live, I suppose, because they really don't get impeached, and I think the term used is so long as they have good behavior or something like that. What I'm getting at here is, but it also has the fewest teeth. It can't really do anything. The legislature can subpoena people and impeach people, and the president can literally is the head of the judicial, or what's the word I'm looking for? The attorney general, that department. Can't think of it. It's too late here. The Supreme Court really doesn't have a lot of teeth. They basically give opinions, and we use their opinions, but their opinions are meaningless if we don't treat them as legitimate. There's a good example of this. I cannot remember the case or the time, but it's the Trail of Tears and Andrew Jackson, and him basically just moving all the Indians from like Florida and Georgia to Oklahoma. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. And he was like, got it. We've heard what you have to say. Let's see you enforce it. And obviously they can't do anything. They ultimately are subject to a perception from the public that they are acting within their own authority. Their authority comes from our deference to them. And so in addition to that, they have to cultivate consistency within themselves over time. And you end up with all these concepts that have developed through common law, ultimately from England, leading to precedent basically being its own authority. So because in the past we have decided this on this issue, this is the law now. And the way they get around that, and that's got a hierarchy to it, right? So your court levels all the way up. The way you can get around that is you try and distinguish the facts of your specific circumstance from the existing law. And maybe they argue that it is the same, and you go all the way to the top, and they either say, no, this has been settled, or they say, yeah, you're right, this is slightly different. So in the future, if a situation is this, but it has this exception, that is how it will be handled, right? But what they don't do is say, this is what we've decided at the highest level, and then 50 years later say, actually, we are changing our mind. They don't do that because ultimately it undermines all of their authority to do so. The ultimate result of that is now it is a political institution, explicitly
Okay.
political institution. Now, whoever has the majority, whatever the majority have thought, I mean, in 10 years, what is Roe back? Do we just change it back? Do we just keep changing it? It's a really problematic thing when you're the appearance of authority, the reality of your authority comes from you being consistent internally, giving people the impression that because you have decided it is law, it is law. But now that's completely undermined. That's completely gone. And then in addition to that, in quick succession, right afterwards, they passed or they decided several cases, one of which bribes are okay, basically, as long as you don't say it's a bribe. The president is immune from oversight as long as it is something he's doing officially as president. And also, if you think it's not official, you are not allowed to question whether it was official. Basically, the president is immune as long as you can make any argument at all that it had anything to do with being the president. And then the last one that they wrapped up with was Chevron, which is not as interesting, but administrative law, Chevron doctrine, there's two or three of these cases actually, but I think we all refer to it as Chevron, is about administrative agencies and deference. This is a 1980, 85, something like that, case about administrative agencies, if they have been explicitly given authority that was contemplated by the legislature when passing the statute, their interpretation of what the statute says is not subject to judicial interpretation. So like, okay, the EPA passes a Clean Air Act, whatever, but they have these things that are going to be done, but that act is executed by the executive branch. And the executive branch will have an agency that is probably authorized by the act, and the officials of that agency, every minute detail is not laid out in terms of how this act will be affected. So there is discretion in terms of how it's enacted by an official who has delegated the authority of the executive branch to do so. And there's a lot of other facets to this. So like, totally encourage you to read up on the Chevron doctrine. There's a whole thing about like how they make rules and whether or not people have the opportunity to comment on those rules. But the takeaway here is because of that structure, the courts do not get to come back in and say, actually, we disagree that that's the best way to do this, and you have to do it this way. And the premise is that, you know, the people who are working as officers of the presidency are put in those positions for a reason. There's just delegations of authority to this point because the president or it's really an exception to the concept that the Supreme Court ultimately interprets what the Congress says. And there are a bunch of caveats to which situations apply, but ultimately it has to do with whether or not it's like contemplated or that it was intentionally left vague or whatnot. And basically they just came out and after 45 years for like 35 years for like, actually, nope. We decided.
You're specifically bringing this up due to Roe v. Wade?
No, I'm saying, no, Roe was just the first. I was really talking about 4 different cases that have all happened in the last 2 years.
So
Chevron
they
getting
just
overturned, the presidential immunity case, the bribery is okay case. I can get you I can get you the actual case names for these, and Roe. Uh, they're all just like completely the immunity and the bribery cases in particular are just so incredibly backwards interpretations of the law. Like on their face, they're just incorrect. The implications are even scarier. So basically, the Supreme Court's been under a lot of negative attention for all of their acceptance of gifts and how lubed up their lives appear. Well, we'll just decide that bribery is okay. The president's under investigation for all of his attempts to overthrow the government and subvert democracy. Yeah, well, we'll just decide the president's immune.
And they're doing this because it's 6-3, right? And Trump put in 3 of them.
Yeah, man, I guess the way conceptualizing that is even harder. It's crazy how no one seems to have any like. I've never heard a Republican complain that it was bullshit that we just didn't like. It's expressly authorized that the president appoints Supreme Court justices, and they get a hearing in the Senate for confirmation. So when Ginsburg died, and there was a year left in Barack Obama's last term, and Mitch McConnell just said we're not going to hold because he's the leader of the Senate, I believe. So he has to call the vote. And he was like, "I'm just not going to call it. We're just not going to have a vote." So we just had 8 justices for a little while.
And they did
I
that because
think
they wanted to wait.
I had that backwards. It wasn't Ginsburg. It was might have been Scalia. Can't remember. But Ginsburg died under Trump
And
with
he
a
replaced
month
him.
with a month left in his presidency.
And they just quickly did it to get him in.
Yeah.
Didn't-
Oh,
yeah.
and because they had power of the Senate again, and they ruled that they had the reasoning he gave, which is just pulled out of thin air, was we should let the American people decide who they want to appoint the next justice. No, we should let the American people decide who they want the president to appoint during his term. But this opening occurred in this term. Well, the rules all changed when it had flipped, and so, yeah, a lot of people would argue that a seat was stolen, right? But it's bigger than that. I really think that the current Chief Justice, John Roberts, cares a lot about. Whenever we refer to courts and law, we refer to them by the name of the Chief Justice: the Roberts Court, the Warren Court, the Rehnquist Court. Roberts cares a lot about how his court is perceived. I would tell you, is very, very conservative. Was on the legal team fighting for Bush in the Florida dispute about recounting when it was Bush v. Gore. Bush v. Gore is like a huge political milestone in the Supreme Court. He ends up taking over. Bush appoints him, right? But I think he has really threaded the needle in promoting the form of American jurisprudence that he wants to, and tried to avoid the impression of impropriety wherever possible while still doing so. I will say that I think most of this started in motion with Citizens United, and you can read about that as well. That's basically the case that decided that there are limits on anonymous donations to political candidates, but not corporations, and that not corporations' donations to political candidates. And that occurred because John Roberts decided corporations are people and speech is protected by the First Amendment. Therefore, corporations can donate money to political candidates without disclosing who donated money to them. So you have a bunch of people who would donate money to a political action committee, a PAC or a super PAC, and they will in turn donate money to the candidates that they want. So basically, we have all these candidates who are funded, and we don't know who funded them.
Okay.
That all happened because John Roberts said corporations are people. All of this to say, if the court was made up closer, if it was 5-4, I think none of these decisions happen. Because I think John Roberts, because if you're, okay, so if the Chief Justice is in the majority, he decides. This is kind of backwards of how it works. Like you propose writing an opinion, and they sign on to it or not. That's how you get the majority opinion, concurrences, and dissents. Um, but if he is in the majority, he decides who writes it, the details, and he can decide to write it himself. So yeah, I mean, some of the more contentious cases under Barack Obama, for example, with the Affordable Care Act being, we talked about Commerce Clause for a little bit there, and the federal government can regulate commerce as it crosses state lines. Can it regulate commerce that doesn't actually exist by requiring it to exist and then regulate it? That was the question with forcing people to buy healthcare. Does the federal government have the authority to force you to buy something and then punish you for not buying it? That was the issue, and John Roberts basically said it is okay, but it's okay because this is actually a tax, which is not an argument that they were really making, if I recall correctly. He just wanted to kind of thread the needle, and I just can't see any of these recent. I can't see Roberts overturning Roe. I mean, I don't think the majority of the big money in the Republican Party wanted to overturn Roe. That's the dog catching the car. You don't want that. You want to keep people afraid of the thing that you say is the greatest evil. You don't want to get rid of the greatest evil, because then what are people going to be mad about? Well, now it's immigrants. But the alternative is now you've motivated a bunch of other people to vote against you who
Right.
previously weren't motivated. I don't think that his big money donors, the handlers of the Republican Party, if you will, if we're following this type of reasoning, right, wanted that. I don't think this is the type of thing that would have happened. But he could vote against it all he wants now. There's 5 conservative justices without him.
And is it
And
important to him, like, even if, are you saying that, like, maybe he would vote against what he knows the other five will do just so that the record will show that he voted against it?
no, he's going to vote with them. But I'm saying if there are 4 conservatives and 4 liberals, he might vote with the conservatives, but make sure he writes it and write it way less inflammatory,
Why would he do that if he's super conservative?
because it's his legacy. Like,
So do you think he's not happy with all this because his legacy is going to, I mean, look like,
I mean, I don't know. It could go either way. You could also interpret it as like we're not blaming him for it because it's going to happen anyway. But this will be known as the Roberts Court, and the Roberts Court will be known as the court that did all this crazy bullshit that no one thought was legitimate. And
that's what I'm saying. Do
and
you think
there
he's kind of
there are
upset about that?
yeah, I imagine he is. The abortion thing for Roe, that opinion was leaked well in advance, which is not normal.
Okay.
Not normal at all. Like a draft was released, and I think people speculated that it was one of the law clerks for Alito who authored it. I think Alito himself authored it or released it. I'm not really sure. There was a whole thing about the metadata being extractable, and you could tell who had done it. But purportedly, he was like really fighting against them on that subject, because like that's a tough one to come back from. That's what you're known for now.
And do you think, I hate to ask, sometimes I feel like I'm asking you these tough questions and it puts you on the spot, and I don't want to do that, but,
No, you're fine. Ask away.
well, just, I don't need a huge answer, but do you think that if Kamala wins or whoever, that they'll just flip that back real quick? Like,
It's a really hard question to answer.
well,
I
actually,
I
it's not her decision, right? It's the Supreme Court's, and they, unless they change the voting,
it's kind of interesting, you know. In theory, yeah. It's well, you mean changing the decision back?
that's what I meant. But now that I think about it, she doesn't do it. It would have to be like if somebody died and she got a Democrat
Well,
candidate.
okay, so you could wait for one to die, right? And the 2 oldest, if I recall, are conservatives, but people live a long time now. You could pass a statute, um, adding it to, you could pass a statute or amend the Constitution. That's a pretty high bar. It's 75%, and states have to ratify. Statute you could probably pass with 60 senators, or so you'd probably have to try and throw out the filibuster so you could pass it with a simple majority. I'm not entirely sure how the rules around that work. Filibuster is not required by law, if I recall. I think it's just kind of a thing that we're accepting that this is going to get super technical if I go too far. But you could also move to expand the court, because I can't recall if it explicitly says there has to be 9, and just add a bunch of seats. I don't know if she has the backing in the House and the Senate. In theory, if she's just able to remain, if she were to win and serve 2 terms, yeah, you probably waited out long enough that you can appoint a few more. It's crazy too, because I bet if Trump loses, I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised at all if he just runs again. It's not like he's almost running to avoid prosecution at this point, and it's not like you can tell him he's not gonna run, because he has the party by the balls, right? He's gonna take his people with him and vote and run third party and split the ticket, and then they're gonna lose. It's a pretty fascinating problem getting into bed with a crazy person, but what I think is more interesting is with all of this, passing this or with this opinion enshrining that, official actions taken by the president are immune from prosecution. It sort of sounds like Kamala could take a lot of really dramatic actions if she wanted. You're the guys who said she could do it. I don't know what those look like. I don't know if that's investigations or because there's definitely some suspect things going on with several members of the court, and where all their money is coming from, because we know what they're paid, and
Right.
gifts from kind of suspect people.
But this has been a thing forever, right? I mean,
Yeah, probably. I don't know that it has been to this scale, and I don't know that this scale of quote unquote bribery has been paired with this type of
yeah, I always think of the
ridiculous.
Clintons. Like the Clintons, they both were in office their whole lives, but yet they're like billionaires. Like,
Yeah, but they're not judges.
okay,
I'm talking about people giving money to a judge and then having a case that shows up before them.
yeah, okay,
And sure, you could make the argument that the principle's the same, but it's not. They serve for life.
that's true.
Um, and it's, I don't know where you take that or what you do with that. That's just a thing to think about, because the expansion of consolidated power in the executive branch is only good if your person's in power. Well, they might have just expanded power and then had the other parties can't. It would be a fascinating thing to watch unfold. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't think
Interesting
I'd want to
times,
work.
though.
Yeah, it is. I wouldn't want to work that hard. I mean, I want to retire, you know?
What do you mean?
Well, how old are some of these Supreme Court justices?
There's at least 2 in their 70s. I think there's 3 in their 70s. I think Thomas, Alito, and Sotomayor, but I'm not really sure. Alito might be in his late 60s. I'm pretty sure he's in his 70s, though. I'm pretty sure
Um,
Thomas is like 77 or something.
I just mean that it seems like a hard job and seems like you'd be busy. Maybe that's,
Yeah,
some
but
people.
it's definitely super validating.
Yeah. Um, I think that's all the topics I had down. Is there anything you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, I had a list of kind of tech related topics that I didn't get to flesh out in my head beforehand, but I think given some of the spin-off stuff we've talked about, it'd be a pretty fascinating thing to close with, which is, I wanted to bring up a bunch of stuff about AI to kind of keep that as a running topic, but and it is a part of this. But so as we've discussed, polarization and news and the question of truth being speculated and isolated to the extent where people are more comfortable believing whatever they want, um, through the casting of doubt on everything. You could have, if you question everything enough, you are left with everything is uncertain. Therefore, pick what you want, which I've seen quite a bit of from the religious right, and it's amazing because I was raised with such an emphasis on uh, truth being objective. Um, and I say all of this to kind of highlight that I read this article the other day entitled, um, what was it called? The End of the Internet. And it's it's something that I have experienced, but I have never seen written out like this before. And tell me if this is your experience as well. That like Google has just turned to complete ass. Like I get garbage when I'm looking for things, and it might not have been an article. It might have been like a Reddit post about an article, but there was a guy in there talking about like, yeah, it turns out like only there will be like 30 legitimate results for the thing you're looking for, and the majority at the beginning are just garbage sponsorships, and like it will be a lot of like spam links, and then you end up with basically just derivatives of everything that you've already seen throughout the end of it. There's no like substance or depth to the results you get. And his argument was that it's because so much, or like you'll end up with just like clearly like AI written articles like everywhere, and that it was getting to the point where everything, it is so easy to fabricate or manufacture versions and derivatives of everything, without you using any real manpower, having a computer do it, having AI generate all of this stuff, that it's getting to the point where this like golden age of the internet, where there's all this interconnectivity, is actually turning into, there is so much of everything there that isn't real, that it kind of feels like it's a waste of time. And he went on this thing about like, when I'm trying to find information on the internet now, I have to type in what I would have searched before, followed by Reddit. And then I have to find a Reddit post about it, find someone talking about it, and they will have a source. I can't find it naturally myself. I end up with just like garbage blog posts about things that I don't even think were written by humans. And it's just fascinating. And I think you're seeing the same thing with like podcasts becoming so big. Is there substance to it? Like people know it's genuine. It's not like just written text. I don't even know who wrote it. And I wanted to package all of that together, but I really just fixated on that. But I'll close with one last piece, which is another post I saw about, in that same vein. Do you remember? Maybe not. I don't think I got a lot of it. Maybe about the internet, but not social media. But like, I know I've seen parents be worried about this. Like the internet is scary. Like we got to protect our kids from it. Like social media, we have like we'll limit what you can do and see and whatever. And I feel like I grew up kind of in that, and now I'm like genuinely worried about my parents and like social media and news and the internet. Not them necessarily specifically, although sometimes my mom will send me Facebook links for like news where I'm like, this is like, this is fake, right? Uh, and I don't think they do. I don't think, it's almost like you have, I am like trained it in parts of school to be like intentionally critical as a listener of certain things. Uh, and that applies to the things that are coming from people who you want to listen to. And I don't think that that existed because there wasn't as much just like fraud in information 40 years ago. And so I'm
Yeah.
sitting here like my mom's scrolling Facebook all the time.
Yep.
Or, I almost want to say that whole boomer generation is exposed to way more fraud than we were at their age when they're just as new to social media as we are, if anything newer. And then you add on top of it that like just AI is just exponentially increasing how much stuff is fabricated. And I'm sitting here thinking like, oh man, I hope some like AI voice modulator doesn't call my parents pretending to be me saying that I'm kidnapped and asking for $10,000 or something. Like, I don't know. It's a weird perspective. Is it the end of the internet? I don't know.
That's interesting to think about. Um, yeah, I haven't. I don't think I use the internet as much as you do, but I do think like you make a lot of good points. Especially when I think about the older generations and how they use the internet, and I do think it's really scary. I see things that um, it takes me a second like to realize like, oh, that's not a real person, that's an AI generated
Yeah.
image, you know. Or I what I start to see a lot of now is like videos of Elon Musk talking to on a
Oh man.
podcast, but really, and it's his voice, but like if you're, especially sometimes when you're scrolling, you're not really zoned in, you're like, oh, like you don't catch right away that this is a voiceover, that's not really what he said in the moment. um, there are times where I try to find like what are the interest rates, like what would this theoretical mortgage payment look like, and all I get are ads like people trying to get me to use their
Oh
service.
yeah,
Like it's
dude.
very hard for me to get to what I want, and I almost have to sign up with an email list or something. I
Hmm.
don't. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm getting AI generated documents. I don't think. But I don't. And my whole life, I never looked past page one, and I'm not a
Yeah.
big
Oh
Reddit
really,
user. No,
dude?
like if it's not the first like five articles, I don't. I just retype my Google. Like I'm just like, let me ask the question in a different way and see what the next five are, you know. But I don't
Yeah.
go farther down. Um,
It's like for you to have quality content, it has to be like paid.
yeah, I do love what I love about podcasts are um there's people that don't want to go on. I don't know, I'm not really into the whole dog and pony show with like the Tonight Show. I never watched any of
Nice.
that stuff my whole life. I didn't care about the funny stuff. Like my parents would watch it, so I kind of know what it is. But
Yeah.
and I,
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't do Saturday Night Live, even though if I ever watch it, it's funny. But like people that are really big, famous celebrities, or sometimes it's just somebody that's like super, maybe they're not a celebrity, but they're an expert in a field that would never, you wouldn't have had access to their opinions with a video before. Now they go on podcasts and they talk
Hmm.
about interesting shit. And it's like, oh, I actually am interested in what Matt Damon, he's giving a, like he's talking about, I saw something with Matt Damon eating hot wings and talking about like
Yeah.
how back in the day there was the movie going to the theaters, and then there was like a second thing that actors would get paid when the movie would come out on DVD, and the actor would get
Right.
like
Right.
part of that money. And he talks about how like that caused actors to do certain types of movies because they knew that they would get paid a second time with the DVD, but now that doesn't happen. So he's like, well, it's 100% relies on the theater ticket sales, and if it's not gonna, in, you know, there's research that shows like it's either got to be like an indie, or it's got to be like Avengers Endgame, or it's not going to make money in the
Yeah.
theaters, and so you don't get these kind of movies anymore. And that type of insight, I feel like, only comes out on a podcast platform where somebody just basically asks. The person doing the interview is so over the moon glad that Matt Damon's on their podcast. They're basically like, whatever you want to talk about's fine, and they ask a simple question, and Matt Damon says whatever he wants. You know.
Yeah.
And so I do love that about podcasts, where like people will go on and they'll talk about their lives, they'll talk about really insightful things that we would never get and the way that media used to be, you know. So I do like podcasts. AI is new for me and very scary, but I've started to use it. Like I use it for doing my
Ooh.
podcast, and I'm loving it. It's like my little friend. I think of it like 3PO. And I'm like, I just have like a little buddy that helps me with like everything that I do now.
I think of
So
it like Jarvis from like Iron Man, except he's an idiot. I'm like, do
yeah,
this, and then he does it, and I'm like, that's stupid, that's wrong. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, and then he just does it again, and I'm like, you're just doing the same thing and acting like it's different. I hate you.
yeah,
Uh, but but yeah, I mean, it's here to stay. It's just weird because it's easy to think of it as text generation, but it's responsible for a lot of other things, like and the image fakes. Man, that's hard enough, but it's getting better really fast. It's the voice that
yeah. The
that
voice is
is
scary.
really scary.
Um, I do think what you're saying though, like I haven't thought of, but if AI starts like, I think people are using AI and they're creating Instagram accounts that are blowing up and they're
Oh
basically not
yeah.
doing any work. Like they're just like using AI for every step of the way and the AI is actually making the video
Hmm.
or making the picture or whatever. And so if AI gets to the point where like an AI is writing an article based on an article that an AI wrote and then the AI is posting that article and the human's not really doing anything, well eventually it's like the original article might have had false information in it, no one fact checked it, and there isn't any thought in it, like human thought about what are the consequences of me saying this. And like 5 steps down the line, people perceive it as fact when really like no one's fact checking it and it's just wrong. And then all the articles, like you're saying, like 10 years down the road, if you just kept going like to page 15, all the articles would basically be the same because they were all written
Yeah.
based off of each other. So yeah, that's
Right,
a
right,
big
right,
issue.
right. Yeah. It's crazy because it's like this used to be you have access to so much stuff. And now it's like you have access to so much fake stuff. So you might as well have access to nothing.
I think you use the internet though for like your job a lot, and I don't use the
Yeah.
internet really for my job. So I'm just like, well, I'm, having a conversation about something or I'm curious about something and it's pretty black and white. Like, when did this happen?
I I don't hit a lot of roadblocks with legal research because it's you have to give your authority for it, and the authorities are official, right? But a lot of times you want to find commentary to help flesh it out, and the commentary might sound really persuasive and be just an opinion, and it's true. It's true in a lot of fields. I've seen it a few times to the point where I know this is there, but I can imagine it being much more problematic for other people.
I just love that I can be like, hey, write me a YouTube playlist description. I'm going to make 10 videos based on this and pull in information you find popular on the internet about this topic. And like the description I get happens in a second and it's way better than anything I could have ever written. And it's got stuff in there that I didn't even know. And like,
Yeah.
so
Well, it's
therefore,
because it made it up. Yeah.
well, but I mean, it's probably pulling it from something on the internet. And I don't know. I mean, it might be true, it might be wrong, but like it looks right, and
Yeah,
like
that's the crazy thing is it's not always pulling it from something off the internet. It sometimes is literally just fabricating details.
that's crazy to me. Like I don't know how it can do that, but
Well, it's got like an anticipatory what would this answer look like? Okay, now you just got to be really strict with it and telling it what parameters it's allowed to use. There was a lawyer that got in a lot of trouble for using ChatGPT for some kind of brief, and it had just made up a bunch of cases that didn't exist.
that's
Yeah, wild,
yeah,
embarrassing.
for that guy.
Well, hey, I'm hoping we can do something each month or so.
Yeah.
Maybe just like a political politic. I'm your political correspondent. We'll do. we'll do an update on everything. I'll get some more information on polls. We can track trends. I'll have a chart and everything.
All right. Well, make sure you get your Fire Everybody hat if you're
Oh yeah,
still listening at this
the
point.
website works now. It is fireeverybody2024.com. And I think I had told people fireeverybody.com. And you're like, it doesn't work. And I'm like, yeah, it's not working on my phone either. I don't know. This whole time I just didn't know what our URL was because there's a QR code. But yeah, it's up and running. We are shipping.
I
So
love it.
place
I
your
love
orders
my
now. Get
hat.
them.
I love the feel of it, the fit of it. It's different. People ask me about it. And
It goes with everything except colors other than black, white, red, and blue.
and I mean, nothing is bigger right now in the world of media than Biden dropping out and the political climate. So it's a pretty good
Yeah,
time to have a political hat slash brand.
dude, good at parties if you're wearing these hats.
Yes.
Like people are like, that guy is interesting.
And in my personal opinion, hats cost $39 now, and this hat goes for $29.
Yeah, 29.99, free
That's a good
shipping.
deal. That's a steal. All right.
It really is, and it's a good way to look interesting for sure.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure though, dude. I look forward to talking more.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. That is the end of the podcast.
Deuces.